Hi, I'm Lexi and this is Hannah, and we're World About Conservation.
This is the podcast where we explore the world of conservation through discussions with our very knowledgeable guests. And this season's focus is on all things ocean.
In this episode, we chat to Dr Gavan Cooke about the class Cephalopoda, which broadly includes squid, octopus, cuttlefish and Nautilus. Gavan is also the lead researcher on the Cephalopod Citizen Science Project, and he and his team are working to engage citizen scientists in collecting data on cephalopods across the globe, whilst providing a programme of outreach to teach people how to ID cephalopods and how to act appropriately should you be lucky enough to meet one.
We learned an awful lot chatting to Gavan today about the work of the Cephalopod Citizen Science Project and the aims of his team for the future. We hope you enjoy listening to this podcast. Please remember to leave a review, get in touch on Twitter, and if you would like to support us as creators, we do have a Patreon. You can check out all of the links in the show notes on our website. Enjoy! Hi, thank you for chatting to us today. So can you firstly introduce yourself to our listeners, who you are, what you do, your pronouns, and your key interest in conservation?
Hi there, my name is Dr Gavan Cooke. I am the creator and director of the Cephalopod Citizen Science Project. I use him, he as pronouns. My interest in conservation is specifically about cephalopod conservation because around the world there are very few fishery quotas, and so they're presently being fished at levels which are unsustainable. And one of the many goals of the Citizen Science Project is to provide breeding data to organisations such as CFAS, which can then provide sensible fishing quotas for cephalopods in UK waters, but also around the world as well.
That sounds excellent. So before we take a deep plunge into all things cephalopod, we do have a very short game we like to play with our guests. So it's a really fun quick fire round of a couple of questions, just to keep you on your toes and for us to get to know you a little bit more. So if you could live in any habitat, what would it be?
Coastal rocky shore.
Excellent. If you could be a dung beetle, a mayfly or a cockroach, which would you choose?
Cockroach. I'd inherit the earth.
Excellent. That's what I chose. And what is one thing that you love that has absolutely nothing to do with conservation?
It's really hard because everything comes back to conservation eventually, I think. Basketball.
Wonderful. That is the perfect answer because everything does come back to conservation.
I do enjoy that answer. I have got more into netball, but purely because I've been watching netball anime and it's made me want to play netball, weirdly. Not that I know how any of the rules work. But before we dive into kind of everything you've just mentioned in your intro and taking over the world as a cockroach, the thing we ask our guests every time we record with them is, what gets you wild about conservation?
Making a genuine difference, I think. Just actually doing something that may have a benefit to biodiversity. It can be quite demoralising and futile, to be honest, sometimes, but I think making an effort is what matters.
I adore that answer, and I absolutely believe that having that wider view on the impact that you can have is so important. I think that perspective really matters, whether you're midway through your first degree or midway through a PhD or doing a job that feels like it's constantly there and you're always doing it. Having that wider view on what you're doing is making a change is so vital, I think, to keeping morale up. Right, so Gavan, now on to the main topic, you. Can you tell us what got you into conservation in the first place?
Well, I think anyone who has a brain and opens their eyes can see that the world is in significant trouble. We're going through the 6th major extinction that the planet has seen, and I think anyone with a moral compass is a conservationist, whether they be a professional or an amateur practitioner. Anyone who recycles is a conservationist. Anyone who picks up litter after themselves is a conservationist. So I think we all are to a degree, especially in these times when we are acutely aware of the problems in biodiversity and habitat degradation. So I think we are all conservationists, more or less. Whether we take it further and make it into a career or make it part of our own research goals is another matter. So I think, I think just opening my eyes and having half a brain shows me that the world needs help.
I adore that answer, because I think that's such a good point, that when we talk about, oh, how can you get involved with all these different things that we've mentioned during our podcast and the season, and it's also that just the little things that you do, the choices you make, be it to pick up a piece of litter, to switch off that light, like everything does make a little bit of a difference, and that is all at different individual scales as well. So what I understand is that you were in the Navy, and then you went to natural sciences. So that's quite a change, but also, have you always just been linked to the ocean then through your life?
I have, very much. I mean, I was born and bred in Blackpool, which is obviously a coastal town. And although hardly a marine biodiversity hotspot, you know, the smell and the sound of the ocean, or the sea in this case, is in my blood. And I used to go and sit at the end of North Pier, and it would feel at the very, very end, past all the gaudy, horrible shows, there'd be a little place where you could sit and you felt like you were on the water, because you couldn't see behind you, and in front of you was just water, and it was lovely. And I didn't do particularly well at school. I'm dyslexic, and I also had some mental health problems and didn't achieve very much. I played too much basketball as well, and also partied a little bit. And didn't do particularly well at school or sixth form, and decided to join the Navy because it allowed me to travel, it allowed me to see the world. And of course, it's very much marine based. And whilst I was in the Navy, I was deployed on the HMS Beagle, of all ships. Now, I'm sure you're aware, and your listeners are aware, that Darwin's ship that he went to the Galapagos and many, many other places was also the HMS Beagle. And fortuitously, they had a copy of The Origins of the Species on there. And if anyone's read it, it's the worst book to read ever. It's just this Victorian prose which goes on forever and ever and ever. And it's just, I wouldn't recommend it to a single person. However, I did plow my way through it because I had 6 months at sea to read it, and I did get through it. And that really made me fall in love with the zoological sciences and evolution in particular. And after leaving the Navy after a couple of years, I started an undergraduate degree at Leeds in zoology. And then that's where my academic career came from, really.
That is quite a journey. And thank you for sharing that with us. I think it's really nice to hear stories from people that haven't always taken the natural route of what Hannah and I have, which is education. So it's quite nice to hear that there's other ways to help and other ways to become informed and make a difference in your own way.
Yeah, very much so. I think even if you don't do well at school, it's never too late. There's such an emphasis on being in the ideal place at 18 and knowing what you want to do at 18, but I really don't think that's realistic for most people. And so I hope in my own story can be a little bit of an inspiration to those who do struggle at school, whether it be academically or personal circumstances. You know, it is never too late to make a career for yourself.
Yeah, I think it's the way the system's set up. And being a teenager, everything feels so big and so massive at the time.
And society and our parents make it worse, I think.
Yeah, whereas I think as you grow up, you realise, oh no, I can have multiple different careers and try things as I find new interests. And it's not as be all and end all as it makes it feel when you are 16, choosing what A levels you're going to do, or whether you're going to go to college, or whether you're just going to stay, like, do an apprenticeship. Like, I think we do put a little bit too much pressure on our youth.
Yeah, I agree entirely. And especially during the present pandemic, I think young people's options are going to feel massively reduced, but I really want to get across that they're not. It's going to require a bit of patience and a lot of work, but I think the world will rotate back to normal eventually, and it's got to hang in there, and things will come good eventually.
Yeah, I think you put it lovelily.
I think
you put it well.
Lovely. I think there's a great point there, though, because it's kind of, like, the decisions about what you do will change over time, but I always go back. I was having a conversation with someone once, and she was in her late 30s, and she was like, I would love to have done marine biology, but it's too late. And I was like, it's really not. My mum was in her 40s when she changed and went to university and did the career she's doing now. Not marine sciences, totally different, but it's healthcare, and everything changed, but it's that later part of her life. And she said the different sections, but it is that, I agree with what you said about our youth, and that probably too much pressure, and especially with ongoing circumstances, that it's created a lot of unease, but hopefully lots of things will come in the next few years for them.
Yeah, fingers crossed.
So, why cephalopods? If you've read the entire book of Origins, what got you hooked on cephalopods? Also, I can't believe you've read the whole book. Like, I opened one page and was like, no.
It's awful. I regret it deeply. Well, a very roundabout route, really. did zoology at Leeds, and I did a master's in Hull. And when I was there, I got offered a PhD in Bangor in North Wales, and I took it. And I did that, but my PhD is in behavioural ecology, so the evolution and the ecological setting of behaviour, or animal behaviour. And there I spent some time in Africa, but in freshwater systems, I was looking at cichlid fish and their evolution and how behaviour influences their speciation. But after that, as is often the case with PhD graduates, there weren't many jobs available. Postdoc positions are extremely hard to find, especially in more esoteric subjects like behavioural ecology. And so I was a bit stuck for work. But during my PhD, I actually was responsible for constructing a 300,000 litre aquarium to hold my own research animals. And after my PhD, I was offered a job as a research aquarium manager. So I was looking after the freshwater and the marine side of things. And we, at the time, coincidentally, just had some cuttlefish and a couple of octopuses, which were being used. I can't remember what they're being used for now, but they were there, and I was responsible for their well-being. And also, around the same time in 2013, the law changed in the UK and Europe, and it protected cephalopods in a scientific setting for the first time. And this means that they were given the same protection as vertebrates. And that means that to use them in an experiment that causes pain, suffering, distress, or lasting harm, you have to acquire a license from the Home Office, which is quite difficult to get, and you have to justify the experiments ethically. And it was a big hoo-ha. It was a very major shift, because the literature in cephalopods, especially when it comes to physiology and understanding their neurology, is actually really brutal. There's a lot of awful experiments in the literature, like cutting arms off, crushing arms, and all these other things, which are now you're essentially not allowed to do them without a license, and it's extremely unlikely you'd be given a license because the work's already been done. And really, I don't know if there's any academic justification for the continuation of that work. And this all meant that cephalopods were at the very forefront of everyone's mind in a research setting. And because we had them, I did some training with the Home Office about their well-being in captivity. And another implication of the law change meant that we had to take their welfare when they're not used in experiments extremely seriously, and you have to provide enrichment, you have to do much more monitoring of water quality and health and so on. And so looking after cephalopods became this massive focus. Even though I had around 300,000 other animals to look after, the real focus was on the cephalopods. And when you work with cephalopods, it's impossible not to fall in love with them. You know, they are just so amazing. They have wonderful personalities, and they're very sassy, or some of them are, because they have personalities. And yeah, it's just impossible not to fall in love with them. And I ended up doing some research regarding their welfare, determining best captive settings for these animals, whether it be with a substrate, and I even looked at what kind of clothing the aquarists were wearing, and if that made a difference to the welfare of the animals. And we did actually find quite a lot of stuff, and we published it. And so really after that, I sort of remolded myself, or rebranded myself as a cephalopod biologist, and started using my PhD training in behavioural ecology to investigate behavioural ecology questions in cephalopods as well. And this has completely dominated my life now. But it's with everything, I think there's a lot of luck involved. Some people will go into cephalopods practically from their undergraduate degree, but a lot of us sort of stumble into our chosen model organism or our favourite organism. So there's a lot of luck involved in it. And after that, I guess a bit of hard work as well.
I agree with that about you stumble, it's almost stumble, because we actually probably just missed crossing paths. So I actually did my undergrad at Bangor and then my master's at Bangor, but I started in 2013 and was marine biology, zoology, joint honours, and then moved into just the marine biology.
I was there in 2013.
Yeah, so I think we probably crossed paths years ago,
like
which is always very strange, but Bangor does proliferate.
Yeah.
All we are learning from this podcast is these weird, tiny little links in the conservation. It's a very small world. When we're talking to people that have been to uni in the UK, we're like, oh, we've met very, very briefly.
Yeah, no, it's always quite strange. But yeah, that's really interesting and quite key to note that change there in what you'll find in kind of the old literature pre that bringing in of the licensing laws, and now what we've come to know and what we've come to understand, which happens a lot with the treatment of different animals. One of the things I'm noticing is some people say cephalopod and you're saying cephalopod. Kef?
I don't think it really matters. I picked up the word, I use a hard C because I was at a conference in Crete, a Cephalopod conference, and all the Greek guys were using a hard C because they're Greek and it's a Greek word. So I I went native and learned from the locals, essentially. And it actually pretty much depends where you are in the world. Generally in Europe and the UK, we do say kef, whereas in Australia and the US, they tend to say ceph more. But it really doesn't matter. So you say ceph, so presumably you picked that up from National Geographic or other American influences. But it really doesn't matter. It makes no difference. It's just a noise, isn't it, really?
I like that distinction. It's just a noise.
As long as the person knows what you're talking about,
exactly.
It's fine. So we have mentioned cephalopods and cephalopods a lot already, but would you mind giving us the answer to what is a cephalopod? A cephalopod? Oh, you've put me on edge now.
Yeah, a cephalopod or cephalopod is a taxonomic grouping at the level of class. If you're unfamiliar with Linnaeus's hierarchical nature of classification, then a class is equivalent to mammals. So when you think of cephalopods, you're thinking on the same level of taxonomy as mammals. So it's a good way to think about it. It helps us put these things into context. And cephalopods are part of the phylum mollusk or molluscan, which are an extremely ancient phylum dating way before the Precambrian period. And so mollusks have been around far longer than vertebrates have. Cephalopods have been around, longer than vertebrates probably. And so very, very ancient. And that gives you an idea of what kind of organism they are. So cephalopods are a class which is like mammals. And within cephalopods, we have two major groups that remain. The coleoid cephalopods, which are the squishy, soft things you're all familiar with. And then you have the nautiluses, which are the outgroup, and they're extremely ancient. And nautiluses have been around for a good 300 million years, whereas the species we're familiar with now are probably very, very recent, within the last few million years or so. And the coleoid cephalopods themselves are maybe 150 to 200 million years old. So there's a real variety of ages in the extant cephalopods that we have. They are shellless in the main, although you do get vestigial shells in practically all cephalopods. Octopuses have very, very tiny stylets, which are the remains of their shells. Cuttlefish have a cuttle bone, which is, again, the remain of their external shell. Squid have a stylus, but sometimes it's known as a pen, and again, that's the remnant from their shell. You have things like ram's horn squid, which actually have an external shell, and very few people are aware that cephalopods can have an external shell. Nautiluses are a very obvious example, but ram's horn squid do as well. And within cephalopods, we tend to have two major groups, and they are the coleoid cephalopods, which are the squishy things, which we're more familiar with, like octopuses and squid and cuttlefish. And then we have the extremely ancient and barely changed nautiluses, which are a real outgroup compared to the coleoid squishy cephalopods. And they have changed little in the last 400 million years or so, and are rightly called a living fossil in many ways. And they are very rudimentary. They're very simple. They're much more like snails than they are cephalopods that we know. They're not very intelligent. They're not very sensory diverse or complex. But they are, very strictly speaking, cephalopods as well, although very, very different. So we have these two major groups of cephalopods, and cephalopods can be thought of as an equivalent to mammals, if you like, if we're talking about taxonomy.
You covered quite a lot of different cephalopods there. Do you know what the biggest cephalopod is? What's the smallest? Where are the scales that we're looking at?
I imagine most people are familiar with the colossal squid, which, if you include its arms, which we don't do, you include its arms and maybe 20 to 25 meters. But we don't really measure cephalopods by their entire length. We tend to only measure their mantle length because their arms stretch essentially, but their mantles are relatively more rigid, so they're a more accurate, consistent measure of length. But if you do include their arms, about 20, 25 meters. And that's not the remarkable thing, really. The remarkable thing about the colossal squid is the speed in which it gets to that size, because within 5 years, probably less, they go from about sort of 20 centimeters in length to 20 meters in length. And that over 5 years is a ridiculous amount of growth. So people get excited about the size of them, but for me, the really exciting thing about them is their speed of growth. It really highlights a very particular feature of cephalopods, or coleoid cephalopods, is their unbelievable ability to turn protein into body mass in an incredible efficient way. And again, that's extremely unusual in the animal kingdom, and why we see them in aquaculture now, because their efficiency at turning food into protein or muscle mass is just phenomenal. When it comes to the smallest squid, I suspect the pygmy squid, which gives its size away a little bit, which I think maybe only gets to about 5 or 10 millimeters in size. So, several orders of magnitude smaller than the colossal squid. And they're found in, as far as I know, Japanese waters around there, Southeast Asia in particular, whereas the colossal squid tends to be more globally distributed, and being a larger cephalopod tends to be in the cooler waters as well. The bigger the cephalopod, generally the colder the water you'll find it in. It's a fair rule.
I love a rule when it comes to organisms, because usually there are none. It's like nature just throws the rules out the window.
It's a loose rule.
always rules with options, should we say. So that is some amazing growth, and like you just said, it is that ability to change biomass into protein. But what do they eat?
But their diet is fairly well known, at least in the many that we've seen. And generally speaking, juveniles will eat will eat decapod crustaceans, and they're obligated to eat these animals because they have a set of essential amino acids which they can't get from anywhere else, and they can't survive without decapod crustaceans. Which is why they're often very difficult to keep in captivity, because you often need live crustaceans like shrimp and crabs and so on. And artificial feeds don't work so well, although the technology regarding artificial feeding has jumped a lot recently. Still, live food is always the best for them. But when they become adults, they tend to shift their diet towards fish because they no longer require the essential amino acids. And looking at what I've seen in the wild, it seems to be that fish are easier to catch than things like shrimp and crabs as well.
So yeah, watching shrimp and crabs, they move about pretty quickly. But yeah, that's really cool, because I hadn't realized that their diet changes and the reasons behind why their diet changed. I was aware that you had to feed them kind of live prey, and that maybe that part of being like a stimulus, especially in captivity. But I hadn't realized it was that shift because of the amino acids.
Yeah, it's because of their diet entirely. They're obligated to uptake these amino acids, and that's why potentially it limits their distribution.
That's really interesting. So you mentioned that as they move to adults, that obviously their diet changes. But how can you age a cephalopod?
You can't, essentially. Some people think that you can with cuttlebones, but it's never been shown. Like cuttlebones tend to have growth rings like trees might do, but they're very inconsistent and just not reliable. So as far as I know, there isn't a reliable method to age a cephalopod whilst it's alive. Certainly, there's no chance of estimating its age. You can estimate its sort of life history, so you could say it's a juvenile, a subadult, or an adult, but it's very difficult to say its age. And to give you an example, Cephalopod officinalis, which we find in the UK waters and also the Mediterranean, they're actually definitely the same species, but they have a very different life history. The ones in the Mediterranean mature much quicker and reproduce much sooner than the ones in our water, and that's because of the temperatures. And our individuals have to migrate offshore every winter because the water gets too cold in the shallows. It goes below 10 degrees, which would kill them. And so they live for 2, maybe 2.5 years, maybe even 3 years. And because they're continually eating, ours get really big, maybe 50 centimeter mantle length, 75 centimeter mantle length, whereas the ones in the Mediterranean are much smaller, maybe 20 to 30 centimeter mantle length. So if you compare those two, they could be at the same point in their life. They could be both sexually mature, but they would look like completely different species, and they would be older than one another. It'd just be very, very difficult to tell. And so aging them is very, very difficult. Add to the fact that they also live very short lives as well. It doesn't give you a lot of room for maneuver. So you could probably guess my age within 5 or 10 years, hopefully, plus or minus. But if a cephalopod only lives 1 year, you just don't have that room for error. So it's very, very difficult to estimate the ages of cephalopods.
I think that's quite interesting itself, is mollusks especially. I mean, it's like when we talk about the differences between us as humans because of where you live, where you grow up, that, you know, if you've got a tank, you're always spending your days in the sun, or why you cut your hair. But in kind of mollusks especially, responding to the environment, because as we've chatted about, I work on bivalves, and their shell growth just changes, because I actually do a bit of aging, and that's one of my loves. It's called sclerochronology, the aging of hard parts, for our listeners. But yeah, it's even for trees. Tree rings don't necessarily mean years. It can just be a growth period of good growth.
Yeah.
And they're all the things you have to look at when you question this data. And in terms of these cephalopods, what's your favourite? Because that is the key question that we have to ask.
I don't really have one. I know that's such a cop-out. I think if I had to say something, it'd probably be Sepia officinalis, just because I've seen so much of them and I've kept them, which is the common European cuttlefish, which we find in the UK waters. But yeah, I don't really have one. I prefer cuttlefish to octopuses, which is quite controversial. I think everyone waxes lyrical about octopuses, but I think cuttlefish are as intelligent in different ways. They're a bit less dexterous, so they don't do some of the tasks which octopuses do. But to be honest, opening a jar shows us nothing about octopus intelligence. You see this all the time, but it does not mean they're intelligent. It just means they're dexterous, which is not the same thing at all. It can be linked, but it doesn't necessarily mean so. And I'm also a rooter for the underdog as well. And because cuttlefish are less popular than octopuses, I'm naturally drawn to them. So I think from the groups of cephalopods, cuttlefish definitely are my favourite. But there's 105 species, so it's very difficult to choose one, especially.
That's a lot to narrow down. So just to put you on the spot a little bit more, do you have a favourite cephalopod fact?
That's really hard. I need to think about that, perhaps.
You've already been dropping quite a bit of knowledge on us, but
Yeah.
I just wondered if you had like a particular standout one, the one that you always pull out in the pub when somebody's like, oh, what do you do?
To be honest, I tend to avoid doing that because a lot of these facts are often misconceptions as well. So I don't like propagating misconceptions. I end up correcting people, which annoys the hell out of people. It's more about their overall holisticness, if you like. The fact that they are very different, the fact that they've exhibited strong convergent evolution for high intelligence, but in a very different way. For example, my favorite fact could be that if human intelligence derived because of our immense sociality, which needs a massive brain to deal with, sociality is incredibly difficult for brains to deal with. And the reason we have language is about sociality, and all the other manifestations of intelligence come from us being super social. My favorite fact is that cephalopods are probably intelligent not because they're social, but because their skin allows them to be clever. And the skin allows them to be clever because their instantaneous color changes are remarkable. And they do this by controlling chromatophores, which are circular rings of muscle which have a pigment inside. And they have hundreds of millions of these across their skin. And the neural complexity required to control each individual chromatophore is immense. And like with humans, you have these emergent properties from this initial requirement of intelligence to control their skin. So they can count, they can solve problems, they have good memories, they are sentient, they are conscious because of their skin, rather than because they're sociable, which is our excuse for being intelligent. So I guess if you had to pin me down for a fact, it would be they're probably clever because of their skin rather than their sociality.
Yeah, because in terms of their skin, those colour changes, obviously, the one we think of when people have seen them maybe on TV or some of the David Attenborough documentaries is changes to the environment. But they do actually use that for communication with, I think, mating, and do they use it for feeding and defence as well?
They use it for all sorts of things. You find in animal behaviour that an animal will develop a signal for some reason. Maybe it's anti-predatory. But evolution loves to be conservative, so they'll also use that signal in courtship as well. So we often find the same signal being used in different contexts. And so, they use their defensive behaviors to communicate aggressively, but also to try and chat up females. They'll also split their body in half, so one half looks like a male and the other half looks like a female. And this allows them to avoid competition from males while still chatting up females. And they've just completely exploited this ability to camouflage in all sorts of ways. They'll use it to camouflage for defense and also predation, but also for aggression and other conspecific and heterospecific communication as well.
That is a different level of multitasking that I don't think humans are capable of. We like to tell ourselves we are, but we're just not. So how many species do we have in the UK? You've mentioned we've got a few in the UK waters, and we can see the differences in environmental when we compare to the Med, but how many species do we have here?
around 10, really. We have some cosmopolitan species that come and go, and we can't really call them residents. So the squid species tend to migrate through our waters, but like I say, won't be resident. We have 3 cuttlefish species, one that you'll see on a regular basis if you dive, or from their cuttle bones on the beach, and 2 which are very, very deep, about between 50 and 100 meters, and you won't see those. We have definitely 1 species of octopus, Aledne serosa, the curled octopus, which is very abundant. And we're starting to see the return of Octopus vulgaris, or the common octopus, which generally likes warmer waters. And so it was very abundant in the UK, and up until about the 1960s, then we had a really unusual cold snap and they all died off. But we're starting to see evidence of their return to the UK now from the Citizen Science Project. We're getting lots of observations of Octopus vulgaris in our waters again, which is really cool. We have maybe 3 or 4 bobtail squid species, which are very, very tiny. They look like cuttlefish, but they're not cuttlefish. So 3 or 4 of those guys. Like I say, maybe half a dozen squid species, but they're really cosmopolitan. We don't have any endemic cephalopods. So our cephalopods are found not just in the UK, but actually all around the Mediterranean and all the way north up to possibly the Arctic Circle, certainly Scandinavia.
That's really, I didn't know there was bobtail squid in our water, so that's kind of pretty exciting. Yeah. I've seen octopus on dives on the west coast, but you've actually just got me thinking. We've mentioned cuttle bones a few times, and just for our listeners to visualize that, that's kind of the white kind of oval thing that sometimes you'll give to birds to peck at.
So we've mentioned a little bit, like a very touching point on reproduction, but how do they reproduce?
They have a very well-known life cycle. They are semiparous, so they are thought to breed once or have one breeding season and then die, although there are reports of this rule potentially being broken, but it's not confirmed yet. So they'll hatch and they'll feed voraciously for a year to 18 months, depending on where they are in the world. If they're in cooler waters, they'll live longer. If they're in cooler waters like ours, cuttlefish in particular will migrate to deeper waters. And when they return after their first or second summer, they'll form loose aggregations of males and females. And they tend to, cuttlefish will mate head first, like this, whereas squid will mate perpendicular to one another. Octopuses tend to do something a bit different. The males are a bit scared of being cannibalized, so they tend to literally mate at arm's length. They have a modified arm, which they sort of push towards the female, hoping that she'll take it. And they'll often even detach their arms and just give it to the female and then scurry off because they think they're going to get eaten.
Throw their arm.
Which,
get rid of it.
Pretty much. Yeah, pretty much. So they are literally mating at arm's length in that case. Bobtail squid, I've just had a paper submitted actually showing that bobtail squid really don't know what they're doing so well. If you've seen something about Mary, the film, then you'll probably have a good idea of what I'm talking about. They just seem to miss quite easily. I don't know why they tend to do this, but they tend to, and some interesting photographs. So they have a variety of different mating styles within this sort of common plan of one of their arms is modified to pass spermatophore to the female, who will then use it to fertilize her eggs. They are polygamous, so the females tend to mate with lots of different males and the sperm competition. And like I said before, we have these sneaker males, so males that will look very much like females and only look like females. And then you have these males which use tactical deception, which is one side looking like a male and the other side looking like a female to gain access to the females when there's a bigger male around. And so they are remarkably diverse in some of their behaviors, but there isn't too much courtship. Cuttlefish court quite a lot. Octopuses don't court at all. It's just if the female likes the smell of him, she'll mate with him. Otherwise, there's no interaction at all. So I guess they are quite diverse in some ways. In other ways, not so
I'm
much.
still kind of internally giggling at an octopus swimming by and throwing his arm at the female to avoid cannibalism, which also makes sense why an octopus might not display as much courtship if there is that risk of cannibalism in themselves.
Well, they're so asocial that the courtship is really about convincing a female that you're the best one in the area. But if you're the only one in the area, then there's no point in courting. It comes more down to then, are you compatible from an MHC point of view? Like, is your major histone system compatible? And so it would be more about smell or olfactory cues, which an octopus can't fake. He just smells as he smells. So if you're not a social species, then courtship is pretty irrelevant.
That's really interesting. And in terms of these different groups of cephalopods, are their eggs quite different? And where might you see them? Do we only see them kind of in slightly deeper, say, past 5 meters of water? Or are we likely to see them in the intertidal, in rock pools? And what do they kind of look like? And if we saw them, do we report them to someone?
Yeah, to start with, you will never see octopus eggs unless you're very lucky, because the female will lay them in a den, which is like a rocky crevice, and she'll stay with them until they hatch, and she'll protect them, and you just won't get anywhere near them. I don't know of anybody who's seen octopus eggs in the wild, apart from some very, very lucky individuals. Very, very rare. Cuttlefish will lay their eggs on seaweed and, unfortunately, man-made structures. And, for example, lobster pots are often covered in cuttlefish eggs, and there's a massive conservation issue where unsustainable practices, where the fishermen are dropping the pots down, they'll put a female cuttlefish in there to attract males, and so bring up lots of cuttlefish, but the eggs as well, and then they'll hose down the eggs, destroying all the eggs. And the eggs are black. They're known colloquially as sea grapes, which gives you an idea of what they might look like, and they're in bunches. If they wash up on the shore, there's really not a lot you can do, because they really need a stable attachment to something, and it's impossible for an individual to go into deep enough water to attach them to something to ensure their survival. So, to be perfectly honest, they're probably just left where they are, and they'll be a good meal for somebody, for something else. Squid eggs, again, they tend to attach them to substrates, often rocks, and they don't attach them to man-made structures, which makes them much less of an issue. Squid eggs are very different. They're quite long, maybe up to 30 centimeters long, and they'll have hundreds of eggs in there, whereas cuttlefish eggs are individual black sea grapes, as we say they're called. Squid egg sightings are very, very important to us. We have submitted a paper very recently in conjunction with CFAS about observations of squid egg laying sites, because unless we know their breeding times, we can't give them sensible fishing quotas. So Citizen Science has already provided data for conservation efforts based on the observation of eggs, particularly squid eggs. And so, yeah, if you do see some squid eggs, we'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, so we will get on to the Citizen Science Project, because I think it's really interesting in talking about how people can get involved and what that engagement actually means and how it matters to the wider world. But before we do, so we know that much of the life history of marine animals is pretty much unknown. It's a world that has yet to be fully explored, shall we say. Is this the same for many of the species of cephalopod?
Yeah, absolutely. We know a lot about maybe 5 species, and cephalopods are extremely popular in research. There are thousands, if not tens of thousands, of research papers, but they all focus on a handful of species, like Sepia officinalis, the common European cuttlefish. We know loads about that animal, especially in the laboratory, not so much in the wild. Again, Octopus vulgaris, we know an incredible amount of biology about this animal, but again, mostly in the wild. We know more about the giant squid, Arthurtoothis ducks, than we do most other cephalopods. And people are a bit surprised by that, because it's so mysterious, the giant and the colossal squid, but they're actually quite relatively easy to find, and we know a lot about their biology. But there's another 800 species at least, which we know very, very little about, very, very little. And I suspect there'll be lots of really exciting discoveries, particularly in South America, where there's not many people studying wild cephalopods there, and the common animal model or the common cephalopod models aren't from there either. So, yeah, I'm hoping South America will be quite exciting avenue for novel cephalopod research in the future.
I mean, that sounds... I've always wanted to go to South America, and I like cephalopods. So if people are thinking about working on them, that sounds like a good place to go. But again, there's so many strands of it.
If you're interested in wild behaviour, I think so.
Yeah, that's really interesting, because also that's that movement from lots of lab-based stuff that historically a lot of papers focus on to the wild behaviour, and the importance of your project in itself with the citizen science, which again we will we'll get to right after I asked you this question. So you've mentioned that you did look after and oversee the aquarium facilities at Bank University, especially in the Ocean Sciences department. And in terms of the husbandry and captivity, what are the main challenges, and why, essentially, if anyone's thinking, oh, this sounds like a great thing I'd like to see every day as a pet, they are not good pets. So can we touch on that a little bit?
Yeah, they are extremely challenging to keep. Primarily, live food is practically vital. You can't commercially buy artificial food for cephalopods, so you'd have to provide them live food, which is an immense task. You'd have to live very close to the shore to be able to do that. Water quality, they can get used to reasonable water quality. So if, for example, they can't tolerate ammonia, they can't tolerate nitrite, which is the same for all aquatic organisms, and they can get used to nitrates as well as any other organism, but you've still got to maintain really good water quality. You can't have any tank mates because the cephalopod will probably eat them at some point. You got to be careful about having an enemy because they can sting some octopuses, not all, but some, and they're extremely challenging. And also, there's the sort of, you can't keep them in groups because they'll kill each other quite possibly. And they only live very short lives as well. So if you found a live one and you brought it home, the chances are it would live less than a year naturally. And so it's an extremely expensive way to keep a pet as well. Regarding ethics about it, it's very mixed. If you keep a cuttlefish, a small cuttlefish, in a very, very large tank, because they're benthic animals that don't move around very much, the only ethical issue really comes from when they're breeding or needing to breed. And then they'll get very anxious, they'll pace around the tank a lot, and they'll become extremely frustrated. So ethically, some points of their life history in captivity seems to be okay. But when it comes to their breeding, they become extremely motivated to breed and extremely unhappy if they're unable to move away from their present place to go and find a male or a female. It's funny that you mentioned them as pets because there was a recent documentary, I think you'll be aware of, Octopus in My House, which is actually a documentary about a family who keep a octopus. And it's going to sound quite bitter, but I was supposed to be the lead scientist on that. I was supposed to be in my house, but they wanted an American family because they were also trying to sell it to the American networks as well. So I was heavily involved in that documentary up until the filming bit of it. And also, interestingly, in the US, they are kept as pets quite a lot. There's a very famous website called Tomno, which is one of those old school forums, which we don't see so much anymore on the internet. And there are, at the moment, maybe a couple of hundred people which have cephalopods as pets, which doesn't sound quite a lot when you have 300 million Americans. But if you are to keep a pet cephalopod, it seems to be you'd probably be in America. It's much more popular than it is anywhere else in the world. In fact, we've just interviewed the curator and owner of Tomno, and on the YouTube channel, you'll learn a lot about keeping pet cephalopods during that segment.
I like that little hint there. Check out the YouTube channel. There's some exciting things coming up.
The links will be everywhere on our show notes anyway.
So yeah, just before we talk about the project itself, and while we're still kind of like learning what a cephalopod is, and we combine the two streams of information, can you talk about some of the behaviours that we've known about for a while? We've talked about this courting, we've talked about the colour change, we've talked about potential aggression and feeding and stuff. But what new observations, if any, have come from the Citizen Science Project?
Well, it's a little bit like, this is a weird analogy perhaps, but the biggest thing from the project so far really is like from the film Terminator 2. And there's a bit in the film where the scientist says, although the Terminator's arm didn't work, it made us think differently and it made us look into different areas of research we never would have gone down. And that's how they ended up with Skynet, which is a lovely circular causality issue, but never mind. And it's the same in the citizen science world. For example, the literature says cuttlefish do not socialize ever apart from when they're breeding. But we saw them socializing when they were juveniles, and we saw them socializing when they were sub-adults. And so we actually put out requests for more observations like this and have just submitted a paper. And if it hadn't have been for a member of the public's video, we never would have suspected that they school or shoal. And so it's really just little things like that really drive us. And we're not trying to replace laboratory or more controlled in situ research. We're just trying to provide different avenues of research based on areas we can't get to. And you're probably aware that diving for work is incredibly complex and very, very difficult to organise. The health and safety executive make it unbelievably difficult and expensive to dive for research or education or for any work, really. And so it cuts out a lot of expense and I hate to say it, hassle if we start to get videos from the public, because again, it can drive us into certain areas of research we wouldn't have thought of otherwise. So a good example is cuttlefish schooling in the UK waters. And as I say, we were really surprised about this. Other things can include the return of Octopus vulgaris, for example. Again, that's quite exciting. It seems to be extinct in our waters, but we can show that it's not. And this is just locally in in Mexico. We have sightings of blanket octopuses breeding, and we now understand their breeding season, which hasn't been published yet, but we wouldn't have been able to do this if it hadn't been for individuals posting to us directly videos of blanket octopuses coming into the shallows and then looking underneath and seeing that there's loads of eggs there. And if the person hadn't have done that, we never would have known. So there's all sorts of different ways. And to be perfectly honest, we've got around 3,000 observations now, and we're only beginning to look through them. The project's been running 3 years, and we are just overwhelmed with data. And it's going to take a couple of years to really look through everything, and then we can really start to categorize just how novel the behaviors are. But a good example is the group behavior. We just don't know what we'll find, which is quite exciting. And the literature is very dogmatic, and that's quite good in some ways, because it says, cephalopods never do this, they never do that. And it makes it very easy to find something spectacular if everyone is saying that it never happens. And so I'm kind of grateful for the dogmatism shown by some older researchers, shall we say.
And that's always nice, kind of those clear cut lines sometimes of in research going, okay, that means if we see something, it's kind of, how to word and present that new data. And yeah, I am actually a commercial diver, and unlike when you think, I'm going to go on a nice recreational dive, when you go on a diving work trip, you mobilize. You have so many risk assessments, so much training, different people in your team, different responsibilities.
And people as well, yeah. You can't go on your own. Yeah. You have to have someone on the shore. You have to have a boat more often than not. At least PADI instructor level help. There's just no chance of me ever doing it under a grant. And so we get citizen scientists to give us ideas, and then I've actually started investing in underwater drones. They're much simpler to use than diving. So you can my drone's got a 25-meter tether, so as long as I'm on a boat, I can take it down, and it's just so much simpler than diving these days.
So before we jump into a little bit more, why you kind of covered why we need a citizen science project and the kind of data that you can get from citizen science, especially the scale, versus sometimes bigger or more specific research projects with academia, for example. But how did this actually all start? If we were to go back to square one of your citizen science project.
Well, it started, I think, in 2017. There was a mass stranding of octopuses off the southern Welsh coast, and I can't remember exactly where it is now. But it made the news. It was in The Guardian, it was on the BBC, and it turns out they were probably dumped there by a storm. And I wrote a couple of pieces for The Conversation, which is an online sort of science article type thing. I was speculating wildly, and then I figured, well, rather than speculating, if other people are seeing this stuff, perhaps I can ask them for their footage. And it was originally, someone from the public who filmed these 20-odd octopuses stranded on the sand. And so I started asking people for footage of their cephalopods, and there was a group called UK Viz Reports, which has 8,000 members in the UK alone. And that suggests there's at least 8,000 people diving in UK waters, which I think really surprised me and may even surprise your listeners. And this UK Viz Reports is about providing visibility reports, because the massive sort of difficulty with UK diving is not the temperature, it's the visibility. Temperature can easily be rectified with a dry suit or a semi-dry suit. And even the people who fear the cold the most can dive in UK waters, but it's the visibility. If you can't see anything, then there's just no point in being there. So this website had loads of images of cephalopods, and I kept bugging people And then the owner told me to go away and make my own Facebook group, and I did. And I called it UK Cephalopod Reports because I was lacking in imagination. And it sort of took off from there. It got very, very popular very, very quickly. And then I decided to start expanding it around the world. So we have, I think, 10 European countries, all in local languages. Japan, we have a group. Mexico and South America and Norway and some others as well, which I forget. And it just kept expanding from there. And the reasons we chose these countries is basically I met someone who could speak the local language and was interested in working with me in this area. And so there was little sort of direction at first. It was a bit of a scattergun approach, but now we've ended up with groups in 14 countries. We have around 3,000 members and about 3,000 different observations from around the world. And now has become my full-time job. You know, I never expected that 3 years ago. It's remarkable how it's turned out. And I was always very interested in education and outreach, and citizen science is really good at that. Now, you'll be aware that taxpayers pay for research, and that research manifests as peer-reviewed publications. Now, maybe your audience don't realize is that the peer review process requires scientists to provide their work for free to a journal. The journal then encourages other scientists to work for free, reviewing the papers for free. I just really want to emphasize that. And then the journal will accept the manuscript and then charge universities to read the manuscript in a published form. So the taxpayer is getting no value for their money, really, when it comes to the outputs of science. The scientists are working for free, essentially, for the publishing houses, the journals. And I just found this absolutely scandalous and was really sick of it. And I'm not the only one. It is a genuine scandal in science at the moment, the amount of money the publishing houses are charging for their work. And so one of my big goals is to provide the research back to the public in a format they understand. And I do this through public talks. And the YouTube channel, hopefully, is going to actually start focusing on recent papers and just to explain them in a more lay sense. And basically just to give back to the taxpayer who is actually paying for our research, because they have no access to it. They have no agency. They have no ownership of it. And I think that's really, really disgusting. And that was a very important part, and became very clear very quickly that the public did have an appetite for cephalopod research, whether it be in a lay sense from a public talk or even just handing out papers. You know, if people ask me for a paper, I'll give them a paper. And that's how it sort of really started.
Yeah, that sounds so interesting. And you've mentioned, obviously, the collection of data, the papers that you output, and then the public engagement side of it that you do as well. If you had to summarize, what are the aims of the project now?
Well, there's three, really. The first is to provide data where it wouldn't ordinarily exist. And that's really key, is that we're not trying to replace laboratory experiments. We're not trying to replace, proper grant-funded diving expeditions, because we can't. We're aware enough that citizen science data has limitations. But first of all, we're trying to provide data where it wouldn't ordinarily exist. The second goal is to provide data back to the public, whether that be through lay articles, public talks. We've had a photographic exhibition pre-COVID, which was really good in Mexico. I really love doing that. It's fantastic. We create ID guides as well for the public. And so education outreach is a very, very important part. And also we're interested in wild animal welfare as well. And educating divers on how best to interact with cephalopods is a real goal of ours. Now, generally, divers are fantastic. We've actually analysing data where we looked at a couple of hundred YouTube videos and we quantified diver behaviour. And generally speaking, it's pretty good. And our only sort of concern, and it's quite a mild one, is that cephalopods are very different to other organisms you'll find. And I'm not really talking about their intelligence. I'm talking about their morphology and physiology, in the sense that if you chase a fish or a elasmobranch, like a shark, around, it's supremely adapted not to be caught. They're streamlined, they're remarkable swimmers, they have great aerobic respiration, they can swim indefinitely. Cephalopods are not designed for swimming at all. Cephalopods' primary defense is camouflage, but we can see them much better than their normal predators can, and so we go up to them, we spook them, and they just try and swim away, and we'll chase after them, and they exhaust really, really quickly and really easily. Now, you may not realize that, not you personally, but as a diver, you may not realize that the cephalopod is exhausted. And when you go away and leave it alone, it's much more vulnerable to predation if it's exhausted. So it's the consequences of afterwards, really, which you don't get with teleos fish. Fish can swim forever, elasmobranchs can swim forever, marine mammals, marine reptiles can all swim forever and ever. They're really, really good at it, but cephalopods aren't. And another issue is that when they do jet backwards erratically, they may catch themselves on rocks or coral. Now, cephalopods spend their entire energy budget on growth and reproduction and not on repair. So if a cephalopod damages itself whilst you are chasing it, even if your intentions are really good, and by chasing I don't mean sort of swimming as fast as you can, I mean it could just mean following it, you may accidentally cause it to damage itself, from which it will never repair. And it will get these injuries and it will eventually die of these injuries, even if they're relatively minor and relatively superficial. So our main goals are to provide data where it doesn't ordinarily exist, to provide service to the public with respect to giving science back to them, and also to help divers how best to interact with cephalopods when they see them.
And I know we know, having spoke to you before we did this and looking through all of the different outreach material you've already got that's available to people on your website, which again will be in the show notes. You mentioned earlier that when we asked you about your favourite fact, that a lot of the time it's all about debunking some of the weird myths, some of the wrong myths. What are some of those myths that you're having to debunk? Maybe what's like the most prevalent one that, if you could say, right, this is not true for our listeners, what would it be?
The most annoying one for me is that cephalopods are aliens, and they're not. There's nothing alien about them. They're different, sure, but if you look in any other class of organism, they're different as well. Cephalopods are interesting because they have certain things which appeal to humans, but there are plenty of other organisms which are just as weird and wonderful. They just don't appeal to humans as much aesthetically, perhaps. So that one really annoys me. Also, looking at their DNA, it's just they're so obviously mollusks, and mollusks are so obviously terrestrial. From Earth rather than from the land necessarily. So yeah, that one really annoys me. And one that's a bit more persuasive and a bit more subtle, and it's something that people tend to massively overestimate cephalopod intelligence. Now, cephalopods are intelligent. They're easily the most intelligent invertebrate, but they're not the most intelligent thing in the ocean by a long way. Cetaceans are far more intelligent. Most marine mammals are probably more intelligent than cephalopods. Also, now this is going to be controversial, there are plenty of fish species which I think are close to as intelligent as cephalopods. For example, there's a large number of papers now which look at heterospecific hunting or collaborative hunting, which includes an octopus quite often. But it often has 4 or 5 different species, 4 of which are fish species, maybe an eel as well. And they are all requiring the same level of cognition to work collaboratively. But it's the cephalopod that gets the plaudits at the end of the day. And there's even some fish that use what we call referential gesturing. And to the layperson, referential gesturing just means pointing, essentially. And it seems like a really easy thing, an obvious thing to be able to do, but it's really, really not. It requires a very high level of cognition to understand that you're directing someone's attention to something. And we take it for granted, but it's very, very rare in the animal kingdom. And your listeners will know this. Like if you try and point to something to get your cat to look at it, the cat will look at the end of your finger. Likewise, dogs, generally speaking, if you point to something, it'll just look at the end of your finger and like, what are you trying to do? Now, some dogs are remarkably intelligent and may be taught to look at the thing the finger is pointing at, but they have to be taught that. It's not instinctive, and it's rare in mammals, very, very rare in mammals. But fish do this. Fish will use their heads to point at food so the other fish species and the octopus can come and get it. And I have to admit, and this doesn't go down very well at all, but cephalopods are probably not as intelligent as the public generally thinks. And often the public get excited about opening jars is a big one, but opening a jar doesn't require any intelligence. It just requires them to have dexterity. And that's why we often or we confuse intelligence, because fish can't possibly do the things we think are intelligent because they don't have hands. But that doesn't mean that they aren't any more or less intelligent. It just means their intelligence is based in other ways and on other things as well. So I think cephalopods are amazing, and I love them, and I will always love them. But we have to be reasonable and look at the evidence, and that suggests that as intelligent as they are, there are many, many intelligent things in the oceans as well.
No, I like that. I like an argument for and against, because I think you're right in the sense that you're only as smart as the test that is testing you, and it's like you said, you can't test a fish out of water, but you also can't test a fish to open a jar. I mean, most days you can't test me to open a jar because I'm weak. But you know what? Half days I'll get it, half days I won't. So it depends on the test. So I asked you about the aims of the projects. Can you tell me a little bit about the outputs of the project? So you've already mentioned you've got some ID guides. You've mentioned that you're obviously publishing a lot of papers by the sound of it, which is ace, and then that you're going to turn them into a little bit more for the layperson, which is excellent. But what can you lay them out for us just so we have a nice bullet pointed list?
Yeah, I mean, we have two broad categories of output, which would be research and education. So we have about 4 papers under review at the moment. Our first one will be the squid egg stuff, hopefully, and that would be a major breakthrough for us to get our first publication to be something so applied and so important to conservation. And that is under review. I think it's actually been reviewed, and we're doing the corrections. I'm not 100% sure. So yeah, our research output, generally speaking, are research papers, but also conference talks, of course, scientific posters, the regular sort of stuff. And we're also, I think of something else. Now, generally speaking, I mean, you guys will be aware, and maybe your audience aware, but the currency in science is published papers, essentially. With regards to education, that is much more diverse. So we do talks. I do talks in public or online. Our website has lots of information. We have a ResearchGate page, which has lots of information, but that's less for the public. We write ID guides. We have ID guides in 5 languages, I think, or 6 languages for the Mediterranean and the North Sea. We're expanding those ID guides into South or Central and North America as well. As I say, we've pre-COVID, we were doing photographic exhibitions. We really love the idea of marrying art with the science as well. I really don't want this to be a solely scientific endeavor. We really want to promote art within the project. It's much more difficult at the moment because the only avenue that we had prior until recently was these public photographic exhibitions. We're actually trying to make jewelry out of fossils now to help us bring in some income. I've just employed a jewelry maker I've got like thousands of cephalopod fossils, which I've sort of given her, and she's going to make them into jewelry. And that's sort of not really educational. It's more income for us. Something more educational that we're doing is we've got a Kickstarter project. We're very, very close to having a Kickstarter project for some Cephalopod top trump cards, which are going to have a QR code, which will lead to an educational website for that species and so on. So that will very much be educational, but also help us to bring in some revenue as well. Yeah, we give talks, as I've said. YouTube channel is specifically for the public as well. So yeah, we have 2 sort of avenues of research outputs and educational outputs, which I think kind of
that is a massive amount of outputs. Can I just ask, just so I can get a bit of a scale of it, how big is your team? Because obviously it started with just you on Facebook, annoying another group and making your own. How much has that grown in the past few years?
All right, let me think. I have 2 regional managers who deal with Europe and Japan, and the other one does South America or the Central America. They're PhD students, Nefa and Chris, who are brilliant. They were students of mine, and they've sort of progressed now, and they're brilliant. And then we have an individual person for each Facebook group, so that must be 14 other people or so. And then we have sort of collaborators with established academics who aren't necessarily part of the project, but all linked to the project through research collaboration. There may be another half a dozen established academics, so maybe 20 or so. But unfortunately, none of them are paid at the moment. It's very much a voluntary organization. I would love to start paying people, but unfortunately, it's just too difficult. And again, unfortunately, the way science works is you tend to do a lot for nothing. And from that, you gain exposure and you also gain publications. And as I've said before, generally the currency in academia is publication. So I'm giving the volunteers as much as I can do that would benefit their careers. I also ask volunteers, if they do something for us, what can I do for them? You know, can I give a public talk to your group? Can I write you a reference, which is obvious, I guess, but anything that they feel they could benefit from the project, I'll try and accommodate. So if they're interested in a particular facet of the project and they're also doing local Facebook group stuff, then I'll try and involve them in something that they are interested in elsewhere and will benefit from them, or benefit them as well.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good thing, is it's the kind of scratching each other's back, for want of a better analogy, because that is one of the big things, especially in conservation, of there is a lot of working for free, and the thing is that's how a lot of data gets collected, and people like yourself, we are trying to change that, but it's just the limitations on being able to do that. And as Lex said, your outputs and your team, they're just, I'm in awe of everything you've managed to do and these great observations you guys are getting.
It's none of it planned, honestly. It's just very ad hoc, very ad hoc. And like I said before, the groups that we have are based on the individuals who want to work with me. It's not, you know, I'm so reliant on them that if we didn't have someone who was interested from Mexico, we wouldn't have a Mexican group. You know, a lot of what we do is driven by the interest of the people who are working for us. There's no point in forcing someone to do something they're not interested in on a voluntary basis just for something on their CV. So a lot of our outputs are based on the skills, talents, and interests of the individuals working with them. So I have to be quite flexible. I can't say this is going to be our goal this year. We're going to do this, this, and that. I have to think, what can the people who work for me do, and what are they interested in, and we'll take it down that direction. So yeah, you've got to be very flexible, I think, and you can't be too rigid when you're working with volunteers. You've got to let them drive what they do in some ways.
Yeah, that's my area of expertise as a volunteer coordinator. I adore it, and it is a wonderful challenge, and I can't think of anything more rewarding than working with people that just want to help in such an amazing way, even if they don't realise how much their help helps.
Yeah, and we've had some really interesting volunteers as well. Like a lot of, especially in the UK group, there's individuals who dive a lot but have no scientific training whatsoever. And they're just really excited to look through the Facebook posts and download the image and fill in a spreadsheet. You know, they have no training or interest in a scientific career, never mind a conservation career, but they're sat there trawling through the images and filling in spreadsheets, you know, and yeah, people just want to get involved. And I think this is going to sound quite cold, but we benefited a lot from the pandemic, a lot, because people had a lot of time, or a lot of people had a lot of time on their hands. And also people who weren't able to dive were looking through their past records and looking for things to do. And also we got a lot of help from universities who had project students who had no projects to do all of a sudden. They weren't able to do field work. And also we have an intern from, or we have 3 interns from Exeter University, and they all required placements which couldn't go ahead because of the pandemic. But because this is digitally based, and we were able to host them. So again, it sounds quite cold, but the reality is that we benefited a lot from the pandemic, I think.
I think it's good to pull out those benefits though, because what I've really noticed, and I hope continues, is that things moving digitally, suddenly there's certain things that have become more accessible. So you can attend a conference without having to travel to the conference, which is great in terms of carbon and also time. So you can attend these talks that are happening in Australia. You can go online and listen to webinars. You can do training courses in your spare time. And they're the little things that have become more accessible because people are thinking about it. And hopefully that does continue in the future, because it's for general day-to-day people, but also people that maybe couldn't access stuff because of other conditions in their lives before the pandemic. So there's definitely a few positives to what's happened. And as much as people don't want to keep hearing the word pandemic anymore, I really hope those things do continue. And actually, you've got me thinking, in terms of your Facebook page and everything, you've mentioned about people actually processing the data. And I imagine if we have listeners that want to get involved, they can contact you through your socials. Do you have to be a diver to join the Facebook page?
Oh, definitely not. We have 1,600 members in the UK group, and I'd speculate maybe half don't dive. They're just there because they're interested. They're there because cult bones wash up on the beach. Yeah, you don't have to be a diver at all. Anyone. And the good thing about the UK group is that we do get observations above water. Like I say, we see octopuses wandering around the place, cuttle bones, eggs, all sorts of things which are valuable to us are visible above the waterline. So yeah, and I think the infrastructure for conferences online, like you very pointedly point out, is so much improved now that it's actually perhaps more inclusive than it's ever been before, because economics are less of a divisor when it comes to watching things online. You know, the internet is nearly ubiquitous, and the costs of watching an online conference are very cheap compared to. I mean, you'll know if you conference fees are ridiculous. 5 days
Yeah.
of talk cost well over £2,000. You know, and so, yeah, I think it has leveled the playing field a little bit, and hopefully that will stay. So maybe it hasn't been allowed a little bit more inclusivity when it comes to accessing online resources or accessing resources that weren't ordinarily online. So, yeah, I think you made a really good point.
And just picking up on, we've mentioned it at the start and throughout, some of the fishery stuff, especially working with CFAS, what are some of the pressures on populations of cephalopods in the UK in terms of maybe climate? Is their distribution changing? Are there fishery pressures?
And this is a big can of worms, and again, this is going to sound a little bit controversial perhaps, but actually cephalopods generally benefit from human intervention, which might be counterintuitive, but wherever we remove fish species, cephalopods tend to replace them. We're removing cephalopod predators, and generally cephalopod species numbers are massively increasing because of human interventions. Even though they were fishing them in massive numbers, the fact that we're removing their predators allows them to thrive where humans are. And so, yeah, actually, I think like cockroaches, cephalopods will inherit the earth. You know, I really think they'll do very well out of our destruction. And again, it looks awful, but the trash that we find in our water is actually used by octopuses as refuges, as hides. And it looks bad, but the fact is those octopuses are probably surviving, whereas they wouldn't ordinarily because refuges are finite. There's not enough for all the octopuses. But as soon as we start throwing cans of Coke in there, then actually, yeah, they do have somewhere to live. Now, I'm not saying we should be throwing cans of Coke in the water. I'm saying that if you look at the facts of the situation, ocean acidification doesn't seem to have any influence on cephalopods, even those with internal shells. So that isn't affecting them. Warming of the water means they breed quicker and in greater numbers. So warming of the oceans is better for them. We're removing their predators. And so, yeah, there's a good set of evidence now that suggests that they're thriving because of us much more than they would have done otherwise. And when it comes to long-term changes, there are, I mean, as I've said, we're starting to see return of Octopus vulgaris in our waters. And also there's this really wonderful, highly speculative paper, and I'm not sure how it got through the peer review process, but it did. And it argues that cuttlefish will eventually, I think within 100 years potentially, eventually reach the Americas, because maybe not where, but there's no cuttlefish on the eastern side of the western side of the Atlantic. However, they could possibly migrate from the UK up into the Arctic Circle, around Greenland, and then down through Canada, because there is a route there. It just requires the water to warm by another 3 or 4 degrees, so not a huge amount. So again, as far as cuttlefish go, it could be that we dramatically increase their range. We practically give them half the planet, which they weren't occupying before, simply because we're warming the water and therefore providing migration routes. And this, like I said, this paper speculates that within 100 years we could have cuttlefish in Canada. On the other hand, on a local scale, it seems to be there are some detrimental issues. As I've mentioned, the destruction of eggs on lobster pots. And we are seeing far fewer sepia officinalis in our waters than we've ever done before. But that doesn't mean that the species is in trouble at all. They have a massive distribution all the way down to mid-Africa, and as I say, into the Mediterranean Sea as well. And so although practices in the UK are unsustainable for our local populations, I think globally cephalopods are thriving because of our presence and will continue to thrive because of our presence, at least until we have to switch from aquatic fish protein to cephalopod protein, then we might see some issues. But then again, on the other hand, aquaculture of cephalopods is thriving, it's booming, and it's likely that we'll get our cephalopod protein from farms rather than from the ocean in the next 30, 50, 100 years. So it's a very complex picture, but my feeling is generally we're making the situation better for cephalopods rather than worse.
Winners of climate change.
I was going to say, this is very different to some of the other conversations we've had on this podcast where it does feel a bit doom and gloom. So it's quite a nice note for us for a change, but I don't know how to handle it fully. But it is...
It's difficult, isn't it? Because like we're destroying the environment, but something at least a few of us love are benefiting.
Something has to prevail.
So it's very, very weird.
Like you said with cockroaches, if everything becomes destroyed, something has to prevail. It's not always going to be the human race, but it's nice to know that cuttlefish, cephalopods, cuttlefish, octopus, squid are doing okay from it all.
And there's another controversial viewpoint of this as well. You know, there has been 5 extinctions before five mass extinctions before the one we're creating. And, you know, if you look at the geological record, after each mass extinction, you know, up to 99, maybe 95% of species won't exist during the Permian extinction event. And life rebounded back in a completely bizarre and wonderful way with the fauna and flora that we have today after the KT extinction, which wiped out the dinosaurs. Now, dinosaurs were probably going extinct anyway, but it certainly allowed mammals to proliferate sooner than they would have done otherwise. And, you know, again, but looking very coldly at the situation, if we remove all the species on the planet because of our negligence and greed, the chances are that in the geological timescales, life will rebound just in a very, very different way. You know, I don't think we could cause complete sterilization of the planet. You know, I don't think that's possible. And when we're looking at geological periods and the timescales that the planet is used to, then it's very sad to lose rhinos, etc. But, you know, it does give me some reassurance to think that, you know, in 10, 50, 100 million years' time, whatever we do will be long forgotten. You know, I do believe in that very much. So as sad as it is to lose species on a rate that we're doing them, extinction is a very, very important and usual process on the planet. And mass extinctions are a very important and usual process on the planet as well. But it's just the reality of the situation. If we can think on longer term scales, then it can give us a little bit of heart. Now, that doesn't mean we should give up now, of course. It's a little bit reassuring potentially.
Yeah, I think it's just like you say, this most recent extinction that we are all living through is just caused by us. And we're not doing it. We're not causing an extinction because we want to. It's just the way that we're living, and we need to find more sustainable ways of living to coexist rather than just constantly destroying the planet. But like you say, if you take a step back and look at it with more like a scientist, less like a human, it's definitely once the humans are gone, the world will continue. Something new will replace us.
Yeah, it kind of does rely on us extincting ourselves a little bit for life to rebound completely, which personally is no great shakes for me. I think we're overrated as a species. You know. If we do extinct ourselves in the next few thousand years, then our lifespan as a species would have been like 300,000 years, which is nothing. It would have been incredibly unsuccessful for longevity as a species if we did do that. You know, the average lifespan of a species is something like 1 million to 2 million years, I think, according to the geological record. So we would have destroyed ourselves in a tenth of that time.
We would literally be the saying, live fast, die young, in long geological time sense.
And that's
you're right, exactly.
Makes people think, and it gets said again and again. But at the end of the day, a lot of the time when we make changes, we're doing it because we're trying to extend the longevity of the human race, because the planet, after it bounces back, will live on. But whether people will, it's a different story.
Yeah, we depend on the planet, fundamentally.
The problem with humans is that we can't see past our own noses. You know, natural selection never favoured any species ever to think ahead of its grandchildren. You know? And we can't think that far ahead. Our governments only have parliaments or whatever, 4 or 5 years maybe. No government can make real good long-lasting changes unless they're in a totalitarian dictatorship, which obviously no one's really particularly happy about. So it's like obesity. You know, we eat sugar because our ancestors craved it and survived the last ice age. If they hadn't have craved and had a massive addiction towards sugar, they wouldn't have survived and we wouldn't be here. So we have that craving because we inherited it. and we can't see past our own noses a little bit. It's very, very difficult. I don't know how we got on the topic of.
No, I was going to say we have gone full tangent, philosophical question of life. So to bring it back to your project,
interesting debate.
Yeah, it is very interesting, but we have gone full tangent, which is something we are pretty bad for. And sidelining is our other favorite thing. You've spoken about how much data you actually have coming out of the project. Is there any tools that you've developed to streamline this process? Because you said it's going to take years to go through some of this data.
To my great annoyance, I found quite quickly that if you have a Facebook page for long enough, you can't access the earlier posts.
Oh, that's sad.
Because if you scroll down, your web browser crashes very, very quickly. Because the way Facebook works, it seems that if you want to see every post, then every post has to be loaded at the same time. So you scroll down and your browser just crashes. So I managed to find a physicist who was interested in our project, a postdoc, and he knows a bit about coding, and he wrote a scraper, which is a bit of a code using Python, and it basically scrapes or automatically gathers the metadata and the images and videos from Facebook in Linux. I think you need to use the Linux browser. And that saved us, really, because I'd lost about 2 years worth of data just because I couldn't access it. Because I hadn't been sort of downloading things as I went along, because I didn't know the project was going to be successful. I didn't have any, typically like a human, I didn't look into the future and think what would be the best thing to do now. I just sort of went ahead and did it. But luckily, Luke, who's a fantastic physicist, wrote this scraper, and now we can access all the data. And we're also actually looking to create an AI program, so artificial intelligence, which will then scour the web for images of cephalopods and their metadata. And one thing that I'm interested in, it's not just the observations that people give to me, but it's actually sort of retroactively scouring the web for citizen science observations. Now, they don't know they're being citizen scientists at the time, but their data is still useful. For example, on our YouTube channel, we have playlists, and those playlists cover different species. And every YouTube video of Sepia officinalis is now in one of our playlists. And those people didn't give us those images, and because of the copyright nature of YouTube, we can use them, we can look at them, we can get data from them. We can't use the videos themselves commercially, of course, because we don't own them, but we can watch them and get data from them. So we have over 130 videos of Sepia officinalis, which we didn't ask for and weren't given to us, essentially, but are still incredibly useful. And we can do that for every species of cephalopod and create these playlists and then get data from them as well. And things like Vimeo, even Instagram, Twitter less so, but any social media platform will have thousands of data points for cephalopods. It's just a matter of going out and finding them and scraping them. And so this AI program will hopefully do that for us eventually, just basically trawl the web and get all the information available.
No, I really like the sound of that, because I think a lot of different industries are starting to use coding and AI and a lot of these newer emerging IT uses to get a little bit more streamlined, and so it's not as laborious and intensive for individual people. So we've mentioned this before, and you are a citizen scientist project as a whole. Yep. So just to break it down for us one more time, how can our listeners get involved with your work and learn more about cephalopods?
Well, the simplest way is to join the Facebook groups, essentially. We have a Facebook group called UK Cephalopod Reports, and that initially was for people to provide us with images or videos of cephalopods in UK waters, but it's sort of expanded now and has lots of people who aren't divers, people who are just interested in seeing what is being reported. And it's a very friendly group. There's never any arguments, really. As a moderator, I've never had to moderate any conversations, really. It's been remarkably well behaved. What we do try to discourage is actually fishermen or commercial fishermen joining, because we found that some of the members, some of the very prolific members, weren't happy sharing where they found octopuses, only for a fisherman or a spear fisherman to come along and catch them. So the UK group, we ask questions before you join. Are you a fisherman? And you could lie, of course, but actually I found that if I look at the groups that you're in on Facebook, I can actually tell if you're lying or not. Because if you say you don't fish cephalopods and then you're full of fishing groups, I can work it out quite easily. Whereas, interestingly, other groups around the world don't have that same cultural difference and are quite happy. And some of the groups have lots of fishermen. Fishermen are actually making reports for us as well. So it's a bit different that way. But if you're in the UK, please join the UK Cephalopod reports. We also have a website, which you've very kindly agreed to link to, and that you can get a lot of information from there as well. And also on the website, you can upload reports anonymously, if you like, or without using social media, if that's what you prefer.
Yeah, and as we've mentioned throughout, and as you just mentioned, all of these links and a couple of the links that stuff we've been talking about will be in our show notes on our website in Gavin's own little space. So just head over there. And I think that's really interesting, is that little bit of cultural difference. And also I'm thinking now, because that's kind of how we first met, was through the reporting group, because as a diver, I just joined loads of groups, and now I'm thinking, yep, you sat there and you looked at all of the random groups I'm a part of. Is she actually a diver? So is it...
It's not so much are you a diver, it's more are you a commercial fisherman or person. You know, it's very easy to find people who are there for, not the best reasons.
The conflicts of interest kind of things. We have covered so much and it's been wonderful. Is there anything, before we ask you one final little bit of a question and wrap up, that you would like to go into a little bit more that you feel like we didn't cover?
Off the top of my head, no. I think, like you say, it's been a really wonderful conversation and I've really, really enjoyed it. I can't think of anything, especially your questions have been really great, I think. And yeah, I've just really enjoyed talking to you guys.
Thanks.
So I feel like I'm not going to be able to fit out the door. My head's exploding.
No, I have adored this conversation. It's been so much fun. And
good.
I learned so much.
So many things I didn't know. And it's always wonderful to talk to somebody new. But before we let you go and continue with your weekend, what has been your favourite part of the project so far?
I think easily and by far is public talking. I do enjoy giving talks, and I think that's a bit of an egomaniacal thing rather than anything else, because I like being the centre of attention. I have quite bad anxiety actually, but talking in front of large groups is really easy for some reason. I don't really understand the psychology behind it. But yeah, giving talks to the public, educating them, seeing their faces light up when they see something really cool, that is sort of a continual enjoyment of the project. Now we're just starting to get some papers out, and I think that will also be extremely satisfying, because it's a lot of work publishing. It's a lot of hardship, a lot of self-doubt, a lot of external push doubt upon you, so it'll be very satisfying when we get our papers coming out. But I think it will always be the case that the public engagement side is what I enjoy most, as far as my role within it. I mean, I love watching cephalopods and seeing the new stuff, of course, as well, but it's a little bit less tangible.
Right, that's it from us. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing your time with us today, your stories, letting us dive into your brain a little bit, which we have really enjoyed. I don't have anything else to add, Hannah.
No, I think that's pretty much time to say thanks for chatting, thanks to our listeners for listening, and everyone to have a wild day, and bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening today. As always, we have been Wild About Conservation and you have been awesome. Please do leave us a review. We would really appreciate it, and we do read them all.
To keep exploring with us, drop us an email or find us on our socials. All the links are in our description and the show notes. If you enjoy our show and want to support us, we are also on Patreon. Just £1 a month, 25p an episode, will cover our creation costs, and anything above that we donate to charity. Thank you to those of you that are already helping us to keep creating.
Our chosen charity for this season are the British Divers Marine Life Rescue, who are an organisation dedicated to the rescue and well-being of all marine animals in distress around the UK. Donations will go to training teams of volunteers and maintaining specialised equipment that is vital for their work.
Don't forget to look out for our next episode next Wednesday, wherever you get your podcasts. If we aren't there, do let us know.
And remember, step outside and get wild about conservation.
Bye!
How do you get wild?
Watching wildlife documentaries.
Wildflower painting.
Diving.
Wild swimming.
Ocean watching.
Rock climbing.
Bird watching.
Listening to podcasts.
Hill walks.
visiting a wildlife charity.